Hey guys, tonight we begin with the blistering and sand-in-everything world of the Crusades, a chaotic era where religious fervor, muddy roads, bad armor, and worse decisions collided in spectacular fashion. Whether you were a knight, a peasant, or just someone who owned a donkey, the Crusades were ready to ruin your week, and possibly your lifespan. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. So, you've heard a sermon. A loud, passionate, vaguely threatening sermon delivered by a man in robes shouting about sin, salvation, and how Jerusalem is technically everyone's business. You're not exactly sure where Jerusalem is. Somewhere east of France? South of your pig farm? You nod anyway. The Pope himself has declared that anyone who joins the crusade will receive full forgiveness of sins. That sounds like a good deal, especially after what you did last spring behind the mill house. You didn't think God saw that, but apparently he keeps receipts. Also, let's be honest, you're bored. You've ploughed the same field for 14 years. Your diet consists entirely of barley, onions, and whatever didn't escape the stew pot. Someone mentions eternal glory, and frankly, that sounds better than milking goats in the rain again. So you sign up, or rather, you get roped in during a tavern conversation that escalates into a holy oath after 3 mugs of weak ale and a misplaced sense of invincibility. You wake up the next morning hungover, holding a wooden cross and someone else's boots. Still, you feel proud. You're now officially a crusader. You've got a patch sewn onto your tunic, a blessing from a priest, and the vague idea that all of this will end with you being showered in gold and gratitude. You've also been given exactly no military training, no map. And your armor? You don't have any. You were told to bring what you can, so now you're armed with a kitchen knife, a frying pan, and whatever's left of your dignity. Your neighbour Gerald brought a rake and a really aggressive attitude. You tell your family you're leaving in the name of God. They ask if God will be feeding you along the way. You laugh. You shouldn't have. Because you are now part of one of the most disorganised, poorly planned mass movements in human history. You're marching thousands of miles with no logistics, no reliable supply line, and more spiritual confidence than common sense. And you haven't even left your village yet. But hey, what could possibly go wrong? Before you even step out of your village, someone hands you a chainmail shirt that smells like it lost a bet. You were promised armour, noble, shining, heroic. What you get is a hand-me-down iron sweater with rust stains, sweat stains, and a lingering scent of disappointment. It's heavy. Not, oh, this is a bit bulky heavy. We're talking, this is a wearable blacksmith shop heavy. Just putting it on feels like being hugged by a sullen anvil. You've also received a helmet, conical, dented, and clearly designed by someone who hated necks. There's no padding inside, just cold metal and the gentle sensation of your skull being slow cooked. For your legs, you get wool. Just wool. There are no armoured greaves unless you're wealthy or very lucky. You are neither. You wrap your legs like a sad present and hope it absorbs some of the pain from the thousands of rocks you're about to step on. And footwear? If you're expecting boots of hardened leather and heroism, think again. You're wearing worn-out turn shoes, soft leather slippers that barely protect you from mud, let alone battlefield conditions. Within the first mile, you've got a blister that's thinking of opening its own church. Also, the surcoat, the brightly coloured fabric worn over your armour to signal your side, is white. Or rather, it used to be. Now it's vaguely beige with mysterious spots, and it flaps like a wet flag every time you walk. It features a red cross, painted on hastily by a guy who also sharpens pigs. There's no consistency across the army. One guy is in full mail. Another's wearing a pot on his head. Gerald, again, is shirtless, with a wooden shield he carved himself. It says Jesus watch this in bad Latin. You try to tie your belt but end up cinching it too tight and nearly passing out. Your sword, if you were lucky enough to borrow one, is dull, unbalanced, and seems to actively dislike you. But still, you tell yourself, I look like a knight. You don't. You look like a scared turnip wrapped in steel and optimism. But it's too late now. You're packed, dressed, and completely unprepared. Time to march. The trumpets sound. Or maybe it's just a guy yelling. Either way, the crusade is moving. And so are you. Very slowly. Very uncomfortably. This isn't a glorious cavalry charge. This is a long, groaning shuffle across Europe with thousands of confused, underfed people dragging carts, goats, children, and at least one man who insists on bringing a piano. Everyone's armed, but only some of the weapons were designed for combat. One man is marching with a pitchfork. Another has tied a hammer to a broomstick and calls it God's toothpick. You've barely left the village, and your shoulders already feel like they've been cursed. The chainmail digs into your neck. Your boots are turning your feet into soup, and your pack, containing exactly 2 onions and an old biscuit, weighs more with every step. Someone sneezes behind you. You consider fleeing. Then there's the noise. Everyone's talking, arguing, praying, singing, or coughing. A nobleman rides past and yells something inspirational like, "Forward, men!" before disappearing for the rest of the day. Meanwhile, you trip over a rock, sprain your dignity, and get stepped on by a passing donkey. The sun is out. It's cheerful. You are not. You're sweating in places you didn't know had sweat glands. Your thighs are chafing in a way that feels like divine punishment. Your water is already warm and tastes like iron and regret. There are rules, of course, but no one's following them. March in ranks? Too late. Someone's already wandered into a beet field. Ration your food? Gerald just ate his entire week's supply before lunch. Respect local villagers? You try, until you realize they're charging half a chicken just to use the well. And then the rains come. Just as you think you might be adapting, the skies open like a sarcastic baptism. Your surcoat clings to you like guilt. The roads become mudslides. You fall twice, once forward, once backward. The goat laughs. By nightfall, you've walked 12 miles and aged 12 years. You lie down in wet grass next to a man you don't know, and whose snoring may be weaponized. You sleep like a brick in a bucket, poorly and with consequences. Only 2,000 miles to go. By day 4, your stomach is singing hymns for food. Loud, desperate hymns. The kind you usually only hear at funerals. You were told the army had supplies. Technically, that's true. It's just that those supplies are either mouldy, missing, or currently being hoarded by someone named Brother Ulrich, who insists he's fasting for spiritual clarity while chewing suspiciously in the dark. Breakfast, if you're lucky, is a hunk of black bread so dense it could be used as siege equipment. You chew it for 20 minutes, make no progress, and end up just sort of gnawing until your teeth get bored. Your companion claims his bread has a nail in it. No one is surprised. Lunch is worse. There is no lunch. There is only the distant memory of lunch. You eat a handful of dried peas, which taste like despair and medieval dust. A man next to you proudly produces a salted fish he's been carrying in his sock. You politely decline and consider fasting for spiritual clarity. By late afternoon, everyone is hangry and hallucinating. One guy thinks he sees a fig tree. It's actually a scarecrow. Another man starts licking his sword, claiming it tastes of glory. It tastes of rust. He now has tetanus. The real problem is that feeding an army on the move is, technically speaking, a logistical nightmare. The supply lines are long, badly managed, and occasionally attacked by the local peasantry, who would rather not donate their entire winter food store to a bunch of crusaders who just trampled their turnips. So you forage. You find a bush with berries. Gerald says they're fine. Gerald also once ate a candle, so you take your chances. They are not fine. You spend the next 2 hours behind a tree questioning everything. Dinner is stew. Glorious, mysterious stew. No one knows what's in it. Everyone eats it anyway. You find something chewy. You do not ask questions. Someone claims it's rabbit. Someone else says boot leather. Both are plausible. By nightfall, you're full. Not of food, just of regret. You dream of bread that doesn't fight back and cheese that isn't green on purpose. You've never missed your mother's onion soup more, and it's only day 4. At this point in the journey, it's official. You smell like a combination of wet iron, regret, and something you hope isn't fungal. Hygiene, once a noble goal, has now been demoted to a vague memory, like clean socks or personal boundaries. You haven't bathed in over a week. Neither has anyone else. You know this because the entire crusading force has started to develop what historians call a strong collective aroma. You're all one big walking cheese wheel of sweat, dust, and medieval body odour. There's no soap. If someone claims to have soap, they're lying, or they've carved it from tallow and self-delusion. You do have water, occasionally, but it's mostly reserved for drinking or pouring on open wounds while screaming. Washing your body with it? That's a luxury reserved for nobles and people with significantly fewer blisters. Your clothes, once proudly stitched with a red cross, now resemble a battlefield in fabric form. Your undergarments have fused to your skin in certain areas. Your boots are damp, possibly alive, and definitely angry. Lice? Oh yes, they've moved in. You name them. You try negotiating with them. They are winning. One knight is convinced his helmet is haunted. It's just head lice throwing a party. You start itching at night. Everyone does. It becomes the unofficial marching rhythm. Scratch, scratch, shuffle, groan. You briefly consider bathing in a river. You approach the water and realize it is freezing, filthy, and already occupied by someone crying into their underpants. You nod respectfully and walk away. And bodily functions? There are no latrines. You go where you can, behind bushes, under wagons, or just wherever dignity officially gives up. Privacy? Absolutely not. You now have eye contact stories with strangers you'll never forget. There's one guy, nobody knows his name, who somehow manages to remain clean. His armor gleams, his face is clear, he smells like lavender. He is either a miracle or a hallucination. Either way, you hate him deeply. You start to dream of soap, of bathtubs, of dry feet, but mostly you dream of a breeze that doesn't smell like 30 men and one regrettable stew. You're not clean. You're not even close. You're crusade clean. You thought enemies with swords were your biggest problem. Nope. It's the guy 3 rows back who just coughed something biblical into the air. Welcome to the real crusade, surviving your fellow crusaders' immune systems. Medieval medicine is less science and more interpretive dance with herbs. If you fall ill, you can expect one of 3 treatments: prayer, bleeding, or being told to walk it off. Spoiler, none of these work, especially when what you've got is spreading faster than gossip at a monastery. It starts innocently enough. A sniffle here, a cough there. Someone throws up behind a bush. Everyone pretends not to notice. By the next day, 5 more are coughing. Gerald has developed something alarming and purple on his neck. He insists it's just a heat rash. You begin planning your own funeral. Tents quickly become infirmaries, or as they're known on the crusade, places where hope goes to wheeze quietly. The healers are overwhelmed. Their main tools are cloth bandages, leeches, and conviction. Sometimes they burn herbs. Sometimes they just wave them near your face and hope you improve out of sheer awkwardness. And the symptoms are not subtle. Fever, chills, nausea, swelling, and a general sensation that your organs have gone on strike. You try to be brave. Then you see someone being cured with a hot poker and decide you're suddenly feeling much better, actually. Sanitation is, shall we say, theoretical. Waste disposal? Random fields? Water? Questionable at best, weaponized at worst. You refill your flask from a stream, only to spot 3 horses upstream using it as a toilet. You drink it anyway. Hydration is hydration. The priests say it's a test from God. The knights say it's the devil. The barmaid who tagged along for some reason says it's because no one ever washes their hands. She is immediately ignored, obviously. You try to keep your distance from the sick until you realize everyone is sick, including you. Your throat burns. Your stomach is sending mixed messages. You consider your chances of survival and remember your last bath was last month. The math is not in your favor. And the worst part? You still haven't fought anyone yet. You're losing a war to soup germs. You've been marching for days, hungry, itchy, mildly diseased. And now you're expecting a warm welcome from the towns and villages along the way. Spoiler, you won't get it. The locals are less than thrilled. In fact, they look at your crusading party the same way a shepherd looks at wolves wearing crosses. Suspicious, tense, ready to hide the livestock. From their point of view, you're a moving catastrophe. Thousands of unwashed strangers shouting in broken Latin, trampling crops, borrowing everything that isn't nailed down, and singing war hymns at midnight like tone-deaf demons. You're not a holy army. You're a walking plague parade. You stop at a town hoping to trade for food. The villagers bar the gates. The local bishop peeks out from a tower and makes the sign of the cross. On you. A monk offers a single cabbage in exchange for you leaving faster. Language barriers don't help. You try asking for water, but accidentally demand someone's wife. You attempt to explain your holy mission and somehow end up proposing to a goat. The goat is not interested. Negotiations break down quickly. If you do manage to get inside a settlement, it's usually followed by price gouging, staring, and someone making passive-aggressive comments about your odor. You buy bread that's older than your shoes, and ale that doubles as varnish. Someone gives you directions to Jerusalem. You follow them for 2 days, before realizing they were just trying to send you to the next village. And if you're in foreign territory? Oh, it gets even better. The locals don't just dislike you, they actively want you gone. They don't care about your papal blessings or your homemade flag. They just want their goats, fields, and general peace back. And considering some of these places were recently raided by other crusading parties who swore they were just passing through, trust is at an all-time low. In one town, a child throws a turnip at your head. It's the most accurate projectile you've seen all week. You came seeking salvation. They see you as a broke, heavily armed tourist with boundary issues. And honestly, they're not wrong. So, you're finally on the move again, marching east. Probably. Maybe. The truth is, no one's actually sure where they're going. There are no GPS devices, no road signs that say, this way to Jerusalem, and most of the people in your group think the Holy Land is just slightly past Constantinople, which they also can't find. Your commander has a map. Sort of. It's a hand-drawn scroll with 3 towns, 2 rivers, and what appears to be a dragon in the corner. You suspect the artist had a vivid imagination and poor geography skills. Still, the commander waves it around like it's the word of God and yells forward at every fork in the road. Confidence, apparently, is more important than accuracy. Every now and then, a local guide is recruited. He's offered a few coins, a goatskin of wine, and a vague promise not to be trampled. He nods sagely, points east, and then vanishes before breakfast. You're beginning to think east just means not here. One guy swears he remembers the way from a dream. Another says he read a scroll once. Gerald, still shirtless and increasingly sunburned, claims he's following divine whispers carried by the wind. The wind seems to be saying, "You're lost." You cross the same stream 3 times in one day. You pass a rock you're pretty sure you already passed. A monk insists it's a different rock. This one is holier. You remain unconvinced. The terrain changes constantly. Forest, swamp, mountains. One stretch of road is so steep your boots slide more than they step. Half the army is now walking sideways like confused crabs. Spirits are low. Feet are lower. And then someone says the worst thing imaginable. I think we took a wrong turn. You're hundreds of miles from home, surrounded by people who think cartography is a kind of pastry, and no one wants to admit they're lost. So you keep marching, proudly, aimlessly, faithfully. Every direction leads somewhere. Whether it's Jerusalem, a Byzantine outpost, or another unfortunate goat village is anyone's guess. But onward you go, fueled by divine purpose, stale bread, and the collective refusal to admit you're walking in a very large circle. You thought it would be glorious. You imagined banners waving, swords clashing with poetic timing, and your enemies falling in choreographed heaps like a troubadour's epic. What you actually get is dirt in your mouth, noise in your soul, and a deeply unsettling realization that no one knows what they're doing. The first thing you notice is the screaming. Not just from the enemy, not just from your side, from everyone. You included. There's battle strategy, of course, but it mostly involves yelling "charge" and hoping the other guy is more confused than you are. Spoiler, he's not. Your helmet blocks your vision. Your sword is too heavy. You try to raise your shield and realize it's on the ground behind you because Gerald borrowed it to cook bacon and forgot to give it back. Archers fire before anyone's ready. The front line surges forward while the back line panics and surges back. Someone gets trampled by his own horse. Someone else is fighting with a frying pan. You see a man trip, stab himself in the foot, and start blaming the devil. Honestly, he might be right. You run toward the chaos because everyone else is doing it, and social pressure is powerful. Dust fills the air. You swing wildly. You hit a helmet. It's your own. You scream. It's very brave. The enemy is fast, skilled, loud. You lock eyes with one and realize, horrifyingly, he's about 15 and significantly more experienced than you. You consider playing dead. You consider actually being dead. Both are tempting. There are horns blowing, commands shouted in 5 different languages, and someone singing what sounds like a tavern song about sheep. It's unclear if this is intimidation or madness. Either way, it's working. After a while, and you have no idea how long, the noise subsides. The survivors crawl away, panting, bruised, and smelling like old stew and bad choices. You're one of them somehow. You're bleeding from the ankle. You don't remember how. Gerald has your helmet now. He's using it as a soup bowl. So, was it glorious? Not exactly. But you're alive, and in the Crusades, that's about as close to victory as most people ever get. The weather in the Holy Land, or more accurately, the long winding disaster parade to the Holy Land, is not your friend. It's not even an indifferent acquaintance. It is a full-blown enemy commander with better timing than your entire army. One moment, it's sweltering. The kind of heat that makes your chainmail feel like a cast-iron oven designed by Satan. You sweat through your clothes, your armor, and your soul. Your leather boots sizzle against your skin. A nearby knight claims he saw a mirage of a tavern. You believe him. You saw it too. You both cry quietly. Then, just when you've accepted your fate as a roast pilgrim, the heavens shift. Clouds roll in like an angry bishop. The skies darken. And suddenly, rain. Not polite rain, not English drizzle. This is biblical. Angry, vengeful, thunder screaming from the sky kind of rain. Your surcoat clings to your body like a wet shroud. Your feet squelch with every step, making you sound like a remorseful duck. Your tent collapses almost immediately. You try to find shelter under a tree, which turns out to be the preferred hangout of 3 equally soaked goats and one man who has given up entirely and is now reciting psalms to his knees. The roads dissolve into mud. You slip twice. Gerald slips 3 times, once face first into a cow patty. You don't laugh, out loud, but your soul chuckles. And the cold, oh the cold. Once the sun disappears, the desert flips its mood like a drunk baron at a feast. You go from sweating in your boots to shivering like a cursed tambourine. Your fingers stop working. Your sword now doubles as an ice sculpture. Your nose runs away from your face and joins another army. You think about building a fire. You fail. Repeatedly. The only thing drier than the wood is your morale. But hey, weather builds character, right? Unfortunately, character doesn't stop you from catching pneumonia while trying to scrape mud off your own eyebrow with a broken spoon. Welcome to crusading. You're not just fighting for the faith, you're fighting the entire atmosphere. And the atmosphere is winning. You came to fight the infidel. That was the whole pitch. A nice simple battle between good and evil, Christian and non-Christian, one clean moral crusade. Except now you've realized something awkward. Half the people on your side can't even agree on which holy calendar to use, let alone which god hates who. You're from Western Europe, Latin-speaking, Roman Pope-following, slightly smelly. And now you're encountering Byzantines who speak Greek, cross themselves differently, and view you with all the warmth of a suspicious cat. They're supposed to be your allies. In practice, they've locked the city gates and told you to wait outside. Politely, with archers. The priest who joined your group says the Eastern Church is heretical. The Byzantine bishop says you're an illiterate goat herder who bathes too little and sins too much. You both nod and pretend to be civil, while muttering spiritual threats under your breath. Then there are the locals, Christian Arabs, Armenian Christians, Syriac Christians. You thought everyone in the East was Muslim. Surprise. Now you're trying to tell friend from foe based on how they chant the Lord's Prayer. You're not great at it. You accidentally threaten a group of monks. They respond by setting your tent on fire. It gets worse. The Muslims? They're not one big army either. There are Fatimids, Seljuks, local warlords, all fighting each other when they're not too busy fighting you. Every time you think you understand who the enemy is, someone changes flags and switches sides mid-campaign. One guy you were chasing last week is now sitting at your campfire, explaining regional politics and eating your last onion. Your commander tries to hold a meeting between different factions. It devolves into a shouting match over whose saint is better. Gerald suggests a duel. No one disagrees. And don't forget the internal drama. Knights arguing with bishops, nobles fighting over loot, peasants forming their own prayer groups. At one point, someone claims a vision of the Virgin Mary in a chicken coop and starts a splinter sect. They charge the wrong hill. Religious unity? That lasted 3 days. Now you're all just hoping no one stabs you over a liturgical disagreement about Lent. God may be on your side. But everyone else is on edge. You thought joining the crusade meant fighting alongside noble warriors, disciplined knights, and pious men devoted to a sacred cause. You were wrong. You are, in fact, marching with the strangest collection of people ever assembled outside of a tavern brawl. To your left is a toothless baker, who brought a rolling pin instead of a weapon. To your right is a man named Thibault, who claims to be a monk, but swears constantly, drinks anything in a jug, and has definitely stabbed someone over a loaf of bread. Gerald, still shirtless, has painted a cross on his chest in soot and says he's God's muscle. Your commanding officer is a 19-year-old noble with too much hair and zero strategy. He believes tactics means pointing dramatically and yelling. During one skirmish, he charged in the wrong direction and ended up in a cabbage field. He still insists it was part of a master plan. Then there are the fanatics. These are the people who truly believe they're invincible because God likes them more. They wade into battle shirtless, shoeless, and sometimes swordless, just blind faith and a large stick. Their survival rate is not inspiring. A merchant is tagged along, selling relics of dubious origin. He offers you the thumb of St. Peter one day, and the official Crusader toothpick the next. Both appear to be twigs. There's also a band of children. Yes, actual children. No one's quite sure where they came from or who invited them, but they've been marching for weeks and somehow have better morale than the rest of you. At night, your fellow Crusaders sing songs, argue about scripture, and get into brawls over who stole whose crust of bread. One man has declared himself Bishop of the Tents, and now gives daily sermons from atop a barrel. His theology is questionable, his balance worse. The only thing that unites this group is mutual suffering and a vague, increasingly confused goal of getting somewhere holy without dying. You don't know who's crazier, your enemies, or the guy beside you who's fashioned a spear out of a soup ladle. But one thing's clear. You're not in good company. You're in weird company. And weird company gets lost. Together. At long last, you've reached your destination, or at least a city that looks like it might be important enough to storm. There are walls, tall ones, thick ones. Behind them, people who clearly don't want you there. So naturally the order is given. Lay siege! It sounds glorious in theory. In practice, it's medieval camping with weapons and way more diarrhea. Your army sets up outside the city, just out of arrow range, you hope, and settles in for what could be days, weeks, or the rest of your natural life. The plan is to wait them out. You just forgot to bring food, sanitation, siege engines, or literally anything useful. Someone tries to build a catapult. It collapses instantly. A battering ram is fashioned from a tree, 4 ropes, and enthusiasm. It lasts 10 minutes before being set on fire by the defenders, who are clearly much better at this. You dig trenches. You build towers. You complain a lot. Then you realize the people inside the city are doing fine, waving at you from their high walls while munching olives and occasionally throwing insults, and possibly waste, over the side. It rains. Everything is mud. Your socks dissolve. Your tent leaks. Your stew tastes like rope and betrayal. Gerald catches a rat and names it dinner. Gulm. Morale is at an all-time low, mostly because someone tried to play the lute last night and it sounded like a goat drowning in wine. And then there's the smell. Thousands of unwashed soldiers, rotting food, and the occasional dead horse. It's the sort of scent that could peel paint off a relic. The local priest says the odour is a test of faith. You think it's a biohazard. You finally try to storm the walls. Ladders are thrown up. Arrows come down. You climb 2 rungs, scream, fall off, and land on someone who was just about to surrender anyway. The assault fails. Everyone pretends they were just probing the defences. Weeks pass. Supplies dwindle. Arguments increase. At one point, someone suggests eating the mascot goat. A fistfight breaks out. The goat wins. Sieges, you realise, aren't about action. They're about boredom, bad smells, and desperately trying to remember why you came here in the first place. One morning, when the sun rises slightly more dramatically than usual, you hear a sound echoing through the camp. The gates are open. Whether through starvation, sabotage, or divine scheduling, the city walls have finally been breached. You expect trumpets, glory, maybe a chorus of angels. Instead, you get absolute chaos. The charge into the city is less a noble procession and more a stampede of sweaty, half-mad lunatics with weapons and a vendetta against architecture. You rush forward, sword drawn, heart pounding, and immediately trip on rubble. Someone steps on your back. You thank them out of instinct. Inside, it's smoke and screaming. No one can tell who's who. Everyone's looting, shouting, or dramatically dying in a corner. A knight gallops past carrying a chandelier. Gerald has found a barrel of wine and is now declaring himself lord of the alleyway. You lose your footing, your helmet, and at one point your temper with the stubborn door. You were told this was a holy war. What it looks like is a holy yard sale hosted by chaos itself. There's no clear chain of command anymore. Your noble commander is too busy posing for paintings that don't exist. The priests are yelling Deus Vult while shoving relics into their robes. One man insists he's seen the Holy Grail. It's a soup bowl with a dent in it. As the dust settles and the city is secured, which here means still smouldering and mostly robbed, you stand in the rubble wondering, was this the plan? You find a relic. You think it's a toe bone. Could be holy. Could be a chicken. Either way, it's going in your bag. You also now possess a goblet, a tapestry you can't carry, and someone's extremely confused cat. But the victory feels strange. You expected to feel righteous, glorious. Instead, you mostly feel tired, sticky, and slightly guilty. You're standing in a place full of crying civilians and broken doors, trying to remember whether this was about salvation or plunder. The line has blurred. A priest pats your shoulder and says, "God is pleased." You nod, but you're not so sure. You came seeking heaven. You got ash, noise, and Gerald throwing up on a relic. You made it. You survived marching, starvation, siege, illness, arrows, Gerald, and the occasional divine misunderstanding. You've technically won, but now you're sitting on a broken crate in a city you helped destroy, trying to remember what your life was like before you joined a holy war run by amateurs with swords and untreated fevers. You've changed, and not in the inspiring, "I've seen the world and grown as a person" kind of way. No, you're thinner, dirtier, and somehow both older and younger at once. You've aged 15 years in your soul, but still get yelled at like a child by someone whose only qualification is owning a fancier hat. You've developed a twitch whenever someone says the word pilgrimage. Your armor doesn't fit right anymore. Your body shaped itself around every bruise, every night spent curled up like a wet pretzel in a leaky tent. Your sword is nicked. Your faith is complicated. You used to believe in clear lines, good and evil, saved and damned. Now you mostly believe in strong shoes and not eating anything that's still moving. Back home, they'll call you a hero. They'll ask what it was like. You'll smile and say, incredible, because deeply chaotic, morally confusing, and constantly damp doesn't fit well in a tavern tale. You might even polish the relics you stole, mount them on the wall, and pretend you knew what you were doing the whole time. You'll nod solemnly during sermons. You'll avoid looking goats in the eye. But deep down, you'll always carry the truth. You didn't crusade so much as survive a travelling disaster with a cross on top. Gerald will write poetry. Badly. Someone will start a cult. You'll quietly donate to the nearest monastery, and never speak of the time you mistook a bishop's hat for a stew pot. Was it worth it? History will say yes. You might say yes. But that twitch in your left eye? That still says, probably not. The Holy Land is behind you, but so is most of your sanity. Long before samurai trained with katanas or gladiators fought in Roman arenas, there were two young Egyptian men circling each other in the desert sand. Their arms were raised, knees bent, feet planted. One feinted a move, the other lunged. No swords, no armor, just skill, strength, and the roar of a crowd watching under the burning sun. Welcome to ancient Egyptian wrestling, the oldest documented martial art in human history. More than 4,000 years ago, long before MMA gyms or Olympic podiums, the people of the Nile were already perfecting hand-to-hand combat. In a Middle Kingdom tomb at Beni Hassan, archaeologists discovered wall paintings that showed over 400 different wrestling holds, locks, and throws, a manual etched in limestone. This wasn't crude brawling. It was a sophisticated system of physical control and psychological dominance. Wrestling in Egypt wasn't just sport, it was status. Boys were trained from a young age, and matches were common in both military training and festive public events. Soldiers grappled to stay sharp. Nobles competed to show their might. Even pharaohs were rumoured to wrestle, not out of necessity, but as a demonstration of divine vitality. The techniques themselves are shockingly familiar. Shoulder throws, hip tosses, single-leg takedowns. Anyone who's watched modern wrestling or judo would recognise the motions. This wasn't a forgotten pastime. It was a polished tradition, one that laid the foundation for martial arts to come. And unlike later combat systems that blended weapons and philosophy, Egyptian wrestling was pure, just the human body, honed to dominate another. But it had a spiritual side too. Ancient texts and temple carvings suggest that wrestling was tied to the gods, particularly Horus, who fought the god Set in a cosmic struggle. Every wrestling match was a microcosm of that myth: order versus chaos, discipline versus wildness. In a way, these matches weren't just physical contests. They were rituals, brutal, elegant expressions of cosmic balance. And through them, Egypt became the unlikely birthplace of organised martial tradition. Long before monks meditated or warriors chanted battle cries, Egyptians simply fought. In silence, in sand, in honour. And the world would never be the same again. If Egyptian wrestlers fought for honour, Roman gladiators fought for survival. Their arena was not a sandy courtyard, but a stone colosseum echoing with the cries of tens of thousands. And behind every victorious gladiator stood something even more brutal: the ludus, Rome's gladiator training school, where martial arts met military engineering. To the Roman mind, violence was not just entertainment. It was art, politics, and power rolled into one. Gladiators were not simple brutes. They were conditioned, categorized, and crafted like weapons, each trained in a distinct fighting style, with a specific set of techniques based on their gear and role in combat. The retiarius fought with a net and trident, using speed and entanglement. The secutor carried a short sword and heavy shield, bred to chase and crush. Every move was calculated, every weakness known. At the core of this system were the lanistae, ruthless combat instructors who ran the ludi like modern fight camps, only harsher. Gladiators, many of them slaves or prisoners of war, endured punishing routines, strength drills, sparring matches, mock battles with wooden weapons. Their bodies were molded into weapons of war, not for the battlefield, but for the blood-soaked sand of the Colosseum. And make no mistake, this was martial arts. The gladius, from which the term gladiator comes, was a short, thrusting sword perfected through centuries of Roman military evolution. Gladiators were taught precise angles of attack, footwork, distance control. They learned how to read an opponent's breath, how to feint, how to strike when the crowd least expected it. The goal wasn't just to kill, it was to entertain. But it wasn't all cruelty. Some gladiators became legends, like Spartacus, a former soldier turned rebel leader who escaped the ludus at Capua and nearly toppled the Roman Republic. Others earned their freedom through victory and became celebrities of their day, idolized like athletes, envied for their skill. Roman martial training was ruthless, but systematic. It stripped men of everything, then rebuilt them as fighters whose very survival depended on their discipline, technique, and endurance. It wasn't a sport, it was a spectacle. And every arena was a battlefield where ancient martial tradition was written in sweat, sand, and blood. Long before Kung Fu dazzled the world or Judo became an Olympic sport, a hidden martial tradition thrived in the lush southern lands of India. Its name was Kalaripayattu, and it wasn't just a martial art. It was a sacred practice, a warrior's yoga, and a form of living theatre passed down through millennia. Kalaripayattu, often called the mother of all martial arts, traces its roots back over 3,000 years, with legends linking it to the mythical sage Parashurama, a warrior saint said to have carved Kerala from the sea. But myth aside, it's one of the oldest surviving combat systems, and arguably one of the most elegant. Where Roman training emphasized brute force, Kalaripayattu prioritized grace, flow, and spiritual alignment. Training began at the Kalari, a sunken dirt pit that served as both a dojo and a temple. Here, barefoot students learned to move like animals. The stance of the horse, the leap of the lion, the strike of the snake. Every motion was connected to breath, energy, and rhythm. Before they touched a weapon, students spent years mastering body control, kicks, and palm strikes. Then came the weapons, and with them, a terrifying beauty. The urumi, a flexible whip sword that coils around the body, is perhaps the most feared and exotic weapon in Kalaripayattu. It's also the most poetic. One wrong move, and the wielder could maim themselves. To master it required absolute focus, trust in the breath, and years of disciplined training. But what made Kalaripayattu unique wasn't just its arsenal. It was its philosophy. Fighters were trained in Ayurveda, the traditional system of medicine, to heal what they hurt. They studied marmam, pressure points said to control life energy. The goal wasn't destruction, but balance. Even in battle, the art emphasized restraint, timing, and inner calm, traits of a warrior sage rather than a killer. By the time colonial powers arrived, Kalaripayattu had become a symbol of native resistance. It was banned by the British for fear of uprising, forced underground for decades, but it never died. Like the flexible urumi, it coiled in silence, only to return, flowing, lethal, and eternal. Kalaripayattu wasn't just a martial art, it was a living philosophy, a dance of death, a hymn to life. Picture this, a misty temple nestled in the mountains of Henan, China. A bald monk stands in silent meditation, surrounded by candles. Then, with a breath, he explodes into motion, fists whipping through the air, body twisting in fluid strikes. This is Shaolin Kung Fu, where martial arts became a spiritual path and fighting became a form of prayer. The roots of Shaolin martial arts stretch back to the 5th century CE, when Indian monk Bodhidharma arrived at the Shaolin temple. Legend says he found the monks physically weak, unable to endure long hours of meditation. So he taught them a series of exercises, part Qigong, part self-defense, that evolved into the foundation of Shaolin Kung Fu. But this wasn't just about building muscles. At Shaolin, every movement had a purpose and a philosophy. The body and mind were one. A punch wasn't just a strike, but an expression of inner clarity. A block wasn't resistance, but redirection. Zen Buddhism encouraged non-attachment, even in combat. To fight with anger was to lose. True mastery meant conquering the self. Training was brutal. Monks practiced stances until their legs trembled, struck trees to condition their limbs, and balanced on poles to improve focus. They learned to mimic the movements of animals: tiger, crane, snake, leopard, and dragon. Each style had its rhythm, strategy, and symbolism. The tiger crushed. The crane evaded. The snake flowed. The dragon transformed. Weapons training was equally rigorous. Staffs, swords, spears, chains. One of the most iconic was the gun, staff, known as the grandfather of all weapons. Monks were taught to turn even farming tools into instruments of defense. Why? Because Shaolin Kung Fu wasn't created for conquest. It was for protection of the temple, the people, and the spirit. Over time, Shaolin monks became legendary. They fought off bandits, resisted invading armies, and inspired rebel movements. Their martial prowess was so feared that emperors alternately patronized and persecuted them. In the Ming and Qing dynasties, Shaolin warriors were both revered and hunted. Despite temple burnings and political crackdowns, the Shaolin spirit never died. It transcended borders, influencing Japanese karate, Korean taekwondo, and global pop culture. From Bruce Lee to Hollywood, its echo still rings. Shaolin Kung Fu was more than martial art. It was enlightenment in motion, a sacred choreography of balance, discipline, and indomitable will. In feudal Japan, martial arts were more than just combat. They were a code of life, etched into the soul of the warrior class known as the samurai. At the heart of their world stood Bushido, the way of the warrior. It wasn't a martial art in itself, but a philosophical backbone that guided every strike, every step, every death. Samurai were not merely soldiers, they were living symbols of discipline, loyalty, and precision. Their martial training began young, sometimes as early as age 5. At the core of their practice was kenjutsu, the art of the sword. The katana wasn't just a weapon. It was considered the soul of the samurai, sharp, balanced, lethal, and beautiful. Every draw, swing, and sheathing of the blade followed a ritualized rhythm. Training was both physical and spiritual. Beyond kenjutsu, samurai studied jujutsu, grappling techniques used when disarmed, and kyujutsu, the art of archery. A samurai was expected to master multiple disciplines, not just for combat, but for personal growth. They meditated to cultivate zanshin, a state of total awareness. In a duel, hesitation meant death. Calmness under pressure was a matter of survival. Yet, perhaps the most fascinating aspect of samurai martial tradition was its psychological depth. Bushido demanded honor, even in defeat. A warrior was taught to embrace death as part of life, to never fear it, only to meet it with grace. If dishonored, a samurai might commit seppuku, ritual suicide, to reclaim dignity. Harsh? Yes. But in their world, integrity outweighed breadth. Samurai martial arts evolved over centuries, often shaped by necessity. During long periods of peace, especially in the Tokugawa era, martial prowess took a more philosophical turn. Schools of swordsmanship emphasized mental clarity, posture, and presence over brute strength. The greatest masters like Miyamoto Musashi wrote treatises blending combat technique with Zen thought. His Book of Five Rings remains a cornerstone of martial philosophy to this day. In time, the age of the samurai faded, but their martial traditions lived on, morphing into modern kendo, aikido, and even influencing business ethics in Japan. Today, the samurai spirit survives not just in dojos, but in literature, film, and the quiet discipline of those who still walk the warrior's path. For the samurai, martial arts were not about victory. They were about becoming worthy of the sword you carried. When people think of martial arts, they often jump straight to Asia or Rome. But across the vast and diverse African continent, ancient warrior traditions flourished, fierce, complex, and largely overlooked by mainstream history. From stick fighting in Ethiopia to the Nguni spear dances of southern Africa, these were combat arts born not from textbooks, but from lived experience, survival, and deep cultural roots. In Ethiopia, Mursi and Suri tribes practiced donga, or stick fighting, a brutal but highly ritualized form of dueling. Warriors wielded long, polished sticks in high-stakes bouts that could end in bloodied faces or shattered bones. But these weren't mindless brawls. Donga duels were a rite of passage, a test of manhood, strength, and even courtship. Winning meant status, respect, and sometimes the attention of potential wives. Further south, in the Zulu lands, martial prowess was elevated to a national ethos. Under Shaka Zulu in the early 19th century, traditional stick fighting, called Induku, evolved into full-fledged battlefield tactics. Shaka revolutionized African warfare by replacing throwing spears with short stabbing spears, training warriors in close combat formations. His Impi regiments practiced disciplined charges, feints, and encirclement maneuvers. Their footwork, shield work, and group coordination rivaled anything seen in Roman legions. But these African martial traditions weren't just about fighting. They were deeply embedded in culture. In Angola, Ngolo was a fluid, acrobatic martial art rooted in dance and ritual. With spinning kicks and evasive movements, it resembled a graceful battle. And it didn't stay in Angola. Enslaved Africans carried Ngolo across the Atlantic, where it evolved into capoeira in Brazil, one of the world's most unique martial arts. Throughout Africa, warriors also used rhythm, music, and performance in their training. War dances served dual purposes, to intimidate enemies and to psych up the body. Movements mimicked animals, spirits, or ancestors. Combat wasn't just a physical act, it was a connection to heritage, identity, and the divine. Though many of these traditions were suppressed during colonial rule, they never disappeared. Today, across African villages and modern gyms alike, these arts are making a quiet comeback. Not just as fighting systems, but as cultural treasures. African martial arts remind us that the warrior's path is not defined by fame, but by resilience, community, and memory. When you think of Vikings, you might picture horned helmets, historically inaccurate, wild beards, and blood-soaked raids. But behind the Hollywood chaos was a cold, calculated system of martial training rooted in survival, discipline, and brutal efficiency. The Norse weren't just raiders. They were trained warriors with a deep respect for combat, and a mythology that made dying with a sword in hand the highest honor. Viking martial arts didn't take place in polished dojos or elegant temples. Training happened in longhouses, clearings, and on frozen battlefields. Young Norse boys were raised with one purpose: to become strong enough to defend their clan, conquer new lands, and earn a name worthy of the sagas. Combat training started early, using wooden weapons for drills, and eventually progressing to steel. The sword, axe, and spear were the primary tools of Viking warfare. While their short swords were useful for close combat, it was the bearded axe, versatile, heavy, and terrifying, that became their trademark. Vikings learned how to hook shields, disarm opponents, and land killing blows with ruthless precision. There was no style for style's sake. Every move had one purpose: end the fight. But make no mistake, Viking combat wasn't mindless brawling. It was strategic, often involving tight shield walls, coordinated attacks, and feints designed to confuse the enemy. They also used holmganga, a formalized duel that settled disputes with honor. These one-on-one battles weren't just about strength. They tested composure, nerve, and technique. Beyond the physical, Viking martial discipline was deeply intertwined with mythology. Warriors believed that Odin, the god of war and wisdom, watched their battles. The berserkers, infamous for fighting in trance-like fury, were said to channel animal spirits, bear, wolf, or boar, through ritual and intoxication. Whether real or myth, the berserker legend reveals the spiritual edge of Viking warfare. And then there was Valhalla, the promised afterlife for those who died bravely in battle. This belief didn't just glorify war. It shaped how Norse warriors fought. Fearless, relentless, focused. To retreat was to forfeit paradise. To stand your ground meant eternal glory. Though Viking martial systems lacked formal documentation, their methods echo in modern reenactment groups and historical combat schools. The Vikings weren't barbarians. They were craftsmen of chaos, forging victory with steel, sweat, and an unshakable belief in their gods. In the heart of ancient Persia, beneath the domed roofs of Zurkane, the House of Strength, warriors didn't just train to fight, they trained to become righteous men. Here, martial arts met music, spirituality, and national identity in one of the oldest continuously practiced warrior traditions in the world, Varzeshi Palavani. This Persian martial art has roots stretching back over 2,000 years to the Achaemenid and Sassanid empires. At its core is Palavani, a system that combines strength training, wrestling, and combat drills with religious and ethical instruction. The word Pahlavan means not just champion, but a noble warrior, one who defends the weak and upholds justice. Training took place in the Zurkana, a sacred gym where rituals mattered as much as reps. Practitioners, barefoot and bare-chested, performed choreographed movements to the rhythmic beat of a drum and the chant of the Morsht, a spiritual singer coach. Exercises included spinning clubs, meals, lifting heavy shields, and swinging iron bows, all designed to build explosive power and flexibility. Think of it as ancient CrossFit infused with poetry and prayer. But the true heart of the system was Koshti Pahlavani, Persian wrestling. Unlike modern Olympic-style wrestling, this was both a sport and a rite of passage. Matches were intense and technical, with an emphasis on throws, leverage, and spiritual humility. Winning wasn't enough. A true Pahlavan had to be generous in victory, respectful in defeat. Philosophically, Pahlavani borrowed heavily from Sufism and Zoroastrianism. Fighters were taught to purify not just the body, but the soul. Strength without humility was weakness. Victory without compassion was disgrace. In this sense, the Zurkane was more than a gym, it was a moral forge. During periods of foreign occupation, especially under Arab and Mongol rule, the Zurkane became a covert center of resistance. Persian identity and pride were preserved in sweat and song, and martial practice became a symbol of cultural defiance. Today, Varzeshi Pahlavani still survives, officially recognized by UNESCO as a piece of intangible cultural heritage. Modern practitioners may wear track pants instead of loincloths, but the spirit remains. In Persia, the strongest warrior wasn't the one who struck the hardest. It was the one who trained hardest, lived nobly, and lifted others with every step. From the dusty tombs of Egypt to the mountainous temples of Shaolin, from the icy fjords of Scandinavia to the sun-baked zurkhanehs of Iran. Ancient martial arts were never just about war. They were blueprints for how to live, how to die, and how to carry oneself with purpose. And even though empires have crumbled and swords have rusted, their echoes still resonate in the modern world, often in ways we barely notice. Walk into a mixed martial arts gym today, and you'll see the DNA of these traditions in every corner. Wrestlers shoot for takedowns like their Egyptian ancestors. Striking coaches teach spinning kicks reminiscent of Kalaripayattu. Fighters train with the same intensity that once forged gladiators and samurai. The packaging may be new, but the principles, discipline, timing, balance, are as old as civilization itself. Beyond the ring, martial arts have become a global language. In schools and temples from Tokyo to New York, millions practice karate, taekwondo, kung fu, and capoeira, not just for combat, but for confidence, clarity, and community. What began as warrior rites has evolved into forms of therapy, meditation, and even cultural diplomacy. Many ancient traditions have also undergone revival. Indigenous African combat arts like Ngolo and Donga are being preserved by historians and practitioners determined to reclaim their cultural roots. In India, Kalaripayattu is enjoying a renaissance, with practitioners blending ancient movements with modern fitness. Shaolin monks now tour the world, performing feats that once guarded monasteries from invaders. But perhaps the most profound legacy of ancient martial arts is their philosophy. The idea that strength must be matched by humility, that victory is meaningless without virtue, that the true enemy is often within. In a world increasingly obsessed with speed, spectacle, and instant gratification, these age-old systems remind us to slow down, breathe, and train with intent. Technology may have changed how we fight, drones, guns, machines, but it hasn't changed why we train. The desire to master the body, still the mind, and walk the path of the warrior remains universal. So whether you're sparring in a gym, shadowboxing in your living room, or simply navigating life's daily battles, know this: you are part of a tradition older than kings, deeper than empires, and stronger than steel. The art lives on, because the warrior never truly dies. In ancient Egypt, beauty wasn't vanity, it was virtue. The Egyptians believed that outward appearance reflected inner harmony, and to be beautiful was to align yourself with Ma'at, the divine order of the cosmos. Cleanliness, scent, and adornment weren't optional. They were spiritual obligations. Each morning, both men and women engaged in detailed rituals of grooming and beautification. The desert sun was relentless, and the Nile's humidity unforgiving. So the Egyptians used unguents, creamy mixtures of animal fats, beeswax, and oils, not just to moisturize their skin, but to protect against harsh weather and disease. These balms were often scented with myrrh, frankincense, or lotus, fragrances thought to be pleasing to the gods. Perfume wasn't just for the living, it was applied to the dead to sweeten the journey to the afterlife. But no beauty regimen was complete without kohl. This iconic black eyeliner was made from galena, a lead-based mineral ground into fine powder and mixed with oils or animal fats. It wasn't just for allure. Kohl protected the eyes from sun glare and was believed to ward off evil spirits. Its application created the almond-shaped, mesmerizing gaze seen in countless temple carvings and royal portraits, from Cleopatra to the boy king Tutankhamun. Cosmetics carried spiritual weight. Colors held symbolic meaning. Green eyeshadow, made from malachite, symbolized rebirth and was associated with the god Horus. Red ochre was used on lips and cheeks to channel vitality, joy, and the goddess Hathor, patron of beauty and love. Even wigs were a statement, not just fashionable but hygienic, allowing the head to stay shaved and cool beneath elaborate headdresses of human hair, beads, and gold wire. Beauty was also status. The wealthier the individual, the more elaborate the makeup box. Elite women had cosmetic jars of alabaster, or faience, while commoners made do with pottery. Scented cones of wax were worn on wigs during banquets, slowly melting and releasing fragrance throughout the evening. A sensual fusion of hygiene, seduction, and opulence. To the Egyptians, beauty was eternal. You didn't just prepare your face for the living world, you adorned yourself for the afterlife. Because in Egypt, even the dead were expected to look divine. In ancient Greece, beauty was philosophy. Literally. The Greeks believed that physical appearance reflected moral character, and to be beautiful was to be kalos kagathos, noble and good. Sculptors carved gods with idealized proportions, not to flatter the gods, but to show mortals what perfection looked like. That same obsession with harmony and balance seeped into cosmetics and grooming. For Greek women, the ideal was fair skin, a sign of purity, status, and freedom from outdoor labor. Pale complexions meant you were wealthy enough to stay indoors. To achieve this, women applied white lead, a dangerous choice by modern standards, or a natural clay called simithion to lighten the skin. Some even used chalk or crushed pearls. It wasn't about vanity, it was about showing the world that you belonged to the elite class. Cheeks and lips were tinted with natural pigments, often made from red ochre, crushed berries, or the roots of the madder plant. Rouge gave the impression of vitality and youth, and lip stains, though subtle, hinted at sensuality without straying from social decorum. Greek beauty avoided extremes. A little colour was elegant, too much was scandalous. Eyes were defined with soot or charcoal. While not as dramatic as Egyptian kohl, this subtle lining enhanced the shape of the eyes and created a soft, shadowed look. Eyebrows were ideally joined, the famous unibrow, which was considered a mark of intelligence and purity. Women even darkened the space between brows with powders or painted it in with kohl. Hair care, too, was critical. Women lightened their hair with vinegar and sunlight, or used saffron to bring out golden hues, as blonde hair was associated with gods and heroes. Styles ranged from intricate braids to tightly wound buns, often decorated with ribbons, pins, or golden wreaths. Men, meanwhile, preferred well-groomed beards and curls, a balance between ruggedness and refinement. Greek beauty wasn't about decadence, it was about restraint, balance, and projecting inner virtue. Cosmetic use was discreet and purposeful, meant to enhance what nature gave you without appearing artificial. In public, a woman's modesty was paramount, but in private settings, especially during symposia and festivals, beauty could become a quiet form of seduction. In ancient Greece, to be beautiful wasn't to stand out, it was to embody the harmony of the gods. In ancient Rome, beauty was both a weapon and a performance. Unlike the restrained elegance of the Greeks, the Romans embraced cosmetics with boldness and flair. From emperors' wives to courtesans and slaves aspiring to rise through their looks, appearance was power, and everyone knew it. A flawless complexion was the Roman gold standard. Pale skin again signified status. It meant you didn't work outside. To achieve it, Roman women used a variety of whitening agents: white lead, chalk, and even crocodile dung mixed with vinegar. Some added powdered horn or oyster shells for an extra glow. Face masks made from honey, barley, or milk were popular among the wealthy, and beauty recipes circulated among the elite like prized secrets. Rouge and lip colour were in high demand. Red ochre, cinnabar, and mulberry juice were used to stain cheeks and lips, often applied in layers for a vibrant look. Unlike in Greece, Roman women weren't afraid of colour, though the line between tasteful and vulgar was a constant topic in literature and gossip. A well-painted face could signal wealth, desirability, or infamy, depending on who was watching. Eye makeup was dramatic. Roman women darkened their lashes and lids with soot, antimony, or even charred rose petals. Eyeliner created almond-shaped eyes reminiscent of Egyptian fashion, and eyeshadow came in greens, blues, and browns. Eyebrows were carefully shaped, often darkened with burnt cork or ash. Plucking was standard. A Roman woman's mirror often included tweezers. Perfume, however, was the true Roman obsession. The wealthy layered scents, rose, cinnamon, myrrh, spikenard, in every room, every garment, and every lock of hair. Ointments were stored in alabaster and glass jars, imported from Egypt, Syria, and Arabia. A woman's scent became her signature. Even men indulged, perfuming their togas and slaves, though moralists like Seneca often scolded this fragrant excess. Wigs and hairpieces were a booming industry. Blonde wigs, especially ones made from Germanic slave hair, were fashionable among Roman elites. Hair was piled high in complex coils and waves, held in place with pins of ivory, silver, or even gold. Hairdressers, ornatresses, were essential household staff for the wealthy. In Rome, cosmetics weren't just about beauty. They were about status, ambition, and social theatre. Every pigment, every scent, every braid told the world exactly who you were, or who you wanted to be. In the bustling cities of ancient Mesopotamia, Babylon, Nineveh, beauty was inseparable from magic, medicine, and the divine. Here, where some of the world's earliest civilizations blossomed, cosmetics weren't just tools for seduction or status. They were amulets against misfortune, expressions of piety, and even ingredients in rituals of transformation. Mesopotamian women, and men, placed enormous importance on grooming. Scented oils and balms were central to daily life. These weren't just moisturizers in a dry climate. They were believed to carry divine energy. Applying fragrant oils was considered both hygienic and holy, aligning the body with the gods. Oils were extracted from sesame, almonds, and olives, often infused with myrrh, cedarwood, or frankincense. Eyes were the focal point of Mesopotamian beauty. Much like in Egypt, dark kohl was applied to the lids and lashes, not only for aesthetic effect, but as a shield against evil spirits and disease. Charcoal, lead, and crushed minerals were common ingredients, mixed into pastes that were stored in small stone jars. The exaggerated eye shapes you see in Mesopotamian statues weren't artistic quirks. They reflected real cosmetic practices. Face creams and skin treatments were recorded on clay tablets. Recipes included crushed date stones, beeswax, and milk to soften and lighten the skin. Clay masks were used to treat blemishes, and scrubs made from salt or ash exfoliated the skin. Grooming manuals weren't uncommon among the elite, early examples of beauty advice that blur the line between science and sorcery. Hair was styled with care and complexity. Mesopotamian women oiled their hair to keep it shiny and manageable, braiding it into elaborate patterns or twisting it into buns, often adorned with ribbons, beads, or bronze pins. Wigs were less common than in Egypt, but hairpieces and false braids were used to add volume or display wealth. Perhaps most intriguing was the link between beauty and magic. Mesopotamian incantations often reference beautification. A spell might call for the application of a certain oil or pigment to attract love or favor. Cosmetic rituals were sometimes overseen by temple priests or priestesses, especially those serving Ishtar, goddess of love, beauty, and war. In ancient Mesopotamia, beauty was enchantment. Each cosmetic act was a ritual, each gaze in the mirror a conversation with the divine. In the ancient cities of the Indus Valley, Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Lothal, beauty left its traces not in written texts, but in terracotta artifacts, delicate tools, and the ghostly shimmer of powdered pigments. Though we have no deciphered script to explain their routines, the cosmetic culture of the Indus Valley speaks through its objects, quiet, refined, and deeply personal. Among the ruins, archaeologists have unearthed tiny mirrors made from polished bronze, delicately carved combs, and oval terracotta palettes, still dusted with traces of red. These weren't just decorative items, they were the tools of daily self-care, suggesting that personal grooming was a consistent and valued part of life. One of the most telling discoveries is the widespread use of red pigment, likely derived from hematite or iron oxide. Applied to the lips, cheeks, and perhaps the forehead, this rouge was more than cosmetic. It may have signified fertility, spirituality, or marital status, much like the bindi in later Indian traditions. The colour red, sacred and vital, has always played a central role in South Asian aesthetics, and its origins may stretch as far back as the Indus civilization. Bathing was a communal ritual. The Great Bath of Mohenjo-daro, with its brick-lined steps and surrounding rooms, points to a culture that valued cleanliness not just for hygiene, but for spiritual purity. Oils, perhaps scented with local herbs like sandalwood, turmeric and vetiver, would have been applied before and after bathing to soften skin and calm the senses. Hair was carefully maintained, lightly oiled and styled into buns or braids. Figurines show women wearing elaborate hairstyles adorned with ornaments. Some scholars believe the people of the Indus Valley used natural plant dyes like indigo or henna to colour hair and decorate the body, precursors to traditions still practiced across the Indian subcontinent today. Fragrance played a role too. Though few written records survive, botanical evidence suggests the use of aromatic resins and herbs. Incense burners found in homes and temples hint at the fusion of scent, sanctity, and everyday ritual. Beauty and cleanliness were not separate from spirituality. They were a part of it. In the Indus Valley, cosmetics were quiet symbols, worn not for spectacle, but for balance, identity, and perhaps even love. Their beauty was deliberate, subtle, and enduring. In ancient China, beauty was a reflection of nature, delicate, balanced, and deeply symbolic. To be beautiful was to evoke the serenity of a plum blossom, the purity of jade, or the grace of a crane in flight. Across dynasties from the Han to the Tang, Chinese cosmetics evolved into a refined and poetic ritual, an art form painted onto the human canvas. Pale skin was the cornerstone of Chinese beauty ideals. Much like in other ancient cultures, fair complexions signified wealth and refinement, proof that you did not toil under the sun. Women used rice powder to whiten their faces, often applying it in layers to achieve a smooth, porcelain-like finish. Some mixed it with pearl dust or powdered lead, unaware of the long-term health risks. Blush was applied with care, not in harsh circles, but in soft shades resembling flower petals. This style, known as fei dian or flying dots, became particularly popular during the Tang dynasty. Women painted delicate red marks on their cheeks and sometimes foreheads, inspired by the colours of nature or the flush of love. Lips, too, were a statement. Red cinnabar pigment was used to tint them in a small heart-like shape, leaving the edges of the lips pale. This created a contrast that emphasized delicacy and restraint, a visual whisper of sensuality rather than a shout. Eyebrows were art. Styles changed with the dynasty. Straight, arched, or curved like the wings of a swallow. Women shaved their natural brows and redrew them with charcoal or black ink. Manuals and scrolls from the Tang and Song dynasties describe dozens of distinct eyebrow styles, each with poetic names like willow leaf or distant mountains. Ornamental touches elevated beauty to theatrical levels. Women wore huadian, tiny floral or jewel-like forehead decals made from gold leaf, paper, or crushed flower petals. These delicate dots symbolized youth, wealth, or seasonal celebration. Perfume and skincare also played vital roles. Scented oils infused with orchid, lotus, or musk were massaged into the skin, while herbal face masks using ginseng or green tea promised clarity and longevity. Beauty wasn't merely cosmetic, it was medicinal, philosophical, even moral. In ancient China, to be beautiful was to be in harmony with heaven and earth, a living poem composed of colour, scent, and grace. In ancient Mesoamerica, among the Olmec, Maya, and Aztec civilizations, beauty was vibrant, ceremonial, and inseparable from the spiritual world. Unlike in some ancient societies where cosmetics were confined to elite women, in Mesoamerica, both men and women adorned their bodies with meaning. Appearance wasn't just about attraction, it was about identity, ritual, and cosmic connection. The Mesoamerican palette came from nature. Red was the most sacred color, symbolizing life, blood, and the sun. Women painted their lips with achiote seeds, which produced a deep crimson tint, while cheeks were coloured with crushed cochineal, a brilliant red dye made from insects harvested on cactus. Black and white were used for contrast, contouring the face or framing the eyes with charcoal and powdered lime. Body painting was common and often ritualistic. Dyes and mineral pigments were applied during festivals, warfare, or religious ceremonies. Warriors painted their faces to intimidate enemies and honour the gods. Priests painted their bodies with ash or chalk to purify themselves for sacrifice or ceremony. And young women wore subtle marks on their faces during courtship rituals, hinting at readiness for marriage. Perfume and fragrance held divine significance. The Aztecs were obsessed with flowers, xochitl, which they used not only in offerings but also in personal adornment. Fragrant blooms like marigolds, plumeria, and cacao flowers were woven into garlands or crushed into pastes and rubbed onto the skin. Copal, a sacred tree resin, was burned as incense and mixed with oils to scent the body before rituals. Hairstyles were deeply symbolic. Maya women wore long, thick braids coiled atop their heads or twisted into buns, sometimes adorned with jade beads or feathers. Aztec noblewomen used hairpieces, ribbons, and even gold dust to enhance their appearance. Men, particularly warriors, styled their hair according to their rank, with shaved patterns or elaborate knots indicating valor in battle. Tattooing and scarification were also practiced, especially among the Maya. These permanent marks weren't decorative. They were spiritual badges of endurance, dedication, or religious transformation. Even dental cosmetics existed. Elites had jade or turquoise inlays placed into their teeth, signaling status and divine favor. For the Mesoamericans, beauty was sacred. Every pigment, flower, and braid was a symbol, a bridge between the earthly body and the celestial realm. In the misty forests and windswept hills of ancient Europe, the Celts cultivated a vision of beauty that was both fierce and earthy, wild yet intentional. They didn't follow the ornate rituals of Rome or the elegance of Egypt, but their appearance was no less important. To the Celts, grooming and adornment were signs of vitality, bravery, and tribal identity. And yes, even warriors had favourite combs. Celtic men and women alike paid attention to their looks. Bronze combs, razors, and tweezers have been found in burial sites, showing that personal grooming was valued. Hair was considered sacred, and both sexes often wore it long, wavy, and styled with lime or animal fat for volume and stiffness, giving warriors that famous spiked or swept-back look that struck fear into their enemies. But perhaps the most iconic element of Celtic appearance was woad, the blue dye extracted from the Isatis tinctoria plant. Warriors painted swirling designs across their faces and bodies, not only to intimidate foes in battle, but also for ceremonial or spiritual reasons. While some debate how widespread woad use truly was, classical writers like Julius Caesar certainly thought it terrifying enough to mention. Jewellery was essential, not just for adornment, but for identity and social rank. Elaborate torques, neck rings made from twisted gold or bronze, were worn proudly by both men and women. Earrings, bracelets, and hairpins added to the visual power. These weren't just accessories, they were badges of strength, lineage, and honour. Makeup was subtler but present. Red ochre was used on cheeks and lips, particularly by women of noble status. Tattoos and body paint may have also had a role in storytelling, marking key life events, tribal affiliations, or spiritual achievements. Animal symbolism was deeply woven into Celtic belief, and it's likely that some body art reflected that connection. Mirrors, polished bronze discs with decorated backs, were found in graves of elite women, suggesting that self-presentation held both social and ritual weight. Beauty, for the Celts, wasn't just about seduction, it was about identity. A well-groomed warrior was seen as disciplined, a finely adorned woman as wise and powerful. In the Celtic world, beauty was raw, elemental, and filled with pride. It honored both the earth beneath their feet and the spirits they believed watched from the trees. Across ancient civilizations, beauty didn't end with life. It extended into death. From the embalmed faces of Egyptian mummies to the perfumed bodies prepared for Roman funerals, cosmetics were not merely tools of seduction or status. They were sacred, offerings to the divine, marks of respect for the dead, and symbols of a person's identity carried into eternity. In ancient Egypt, this belief was especially vivid. The dead were buried with their makeup palettes, coal containers, and scented oils, often placed carefully within the tomb beside Shabti figurines and amulets. Why? Because looking presentable in the afterlife mattered. You were expected to meet the gods looking divine. Tomb paintings show the deceased wearing full makeup, rouged cheeks, elaborate wigs, eyes lined in perfect black. Beauty was eternal, and cosmetics were as essential as food and water for the journey to the next world. The Romans too took grooming seriously in death. Elite Romans prepared their bodies with myrrh, cinnamon, and spikenard. Perfumed oils preserved the flesh and masked the smell of decay, but more than that, they elevated the body to a godlike state. Roman funerals were public displays of wealth and virtue, and a well-groomed corpse reflected honor on the entire family. Among the Greeks, funerary rites included washing the body, dressing it in fine robes, and adorning it with oils and garlands. Mirrors, combs, and cosmetic tools were buried with women, especially among the aristocracy. This wasn't vanity. It was remembrance. These objects told a story about who the deceased had been, refined, admired, connected to the divine order of beauty. In Mesopotamia, oils and incense were used to anoint the dead as part of sacred ritual. Cosmetic substances were believed to have protective properties, warding off demons and ensuring a peaceful passage to the underworld. Death was not an erasure of beauty, but a transformation of it into something cosmic and enduring. Even in prehistoric burials, red ochre has been found sprinkled over bodies, possibly symbolic of blood, rebirth, or vitality. It suggests that the impulse to beautify and sanctify the body in death is as old as civilization itself. Across cultures and centuries, cosmetics bridged the mortal and the divine. In life, they dazzled. In death, they consecrated. Beauty wasn't fleeting. It was forever. Beneath the chaotic rhythm of Istanbul, the calls to prayer, the ferry horns on the Bosphorus, the footsteps of tourists rushing between mosques and markets, there is silence. Cool, echoing, ancient silence. You step down a stone staircase, and the temperature shifts. The air becomes damp. Then suddenly, the city vanishes, and the basilica cistern swallows you whole. Built in the 6th century under Emperor Justinian the Great, the basilica cistern, known in Turkish as Yerebatan Sarnıcı, is the largest surviving underground water reservoir from the Byzantine Empire. It's a hidden cathedral of water, vast, brooding, and quiet as a tomb. Over 300 feet long and 200 feet wide, it once held up to 80,000 cubic meters of water, enough to supply the Great Palace of Constantinople and surrounding buildings. But this wasn't just a utilitarian tank. No, the Byzantines built even their water storage with ambition. The cistern is supported by 336 marble columns, most towering over 9 meters tall, arranged in 12 perfect rows. The ceilings they hold curve gently into vaults, creating the illusion of a cathedral submerged in shadow. Reflections ripple beneath your feet. It feels as if you've stepped into the underworld, lit only by the glint of water and the occasional flickering spotlight. The source of this water? The distant Belgrade forest, brought through aqueducts stretching for miles. Water in Constantinople was survival. The city had been sieged more times than anyone could count. And in times of war, when aqueducts were cut and fountains ran dry, the basilica cistern ensured life continued underground. For centuries, it was forgotten. After the Ottoman conquest of Constantinople in 1453, the cistern slipped from public memory. its entrances sealed, its purpose lost. Locals spoke of houses with mysteriously wet basements, some even fished from their floors. It wasn't until the 16th century that a curious scholar rediscovered it, guided by tales of water that whispered beneath the earth. Today, it stands not just as a monument to Byzantine ingenuity, but as a surreal echo of a world that once ruled the known earth. A place where time seems to drip slowly from the ceiling, and the ghosts of emperors walk silently between the columns. To understand the Basilica Cistern, you have to understand its creator, Emperor Justinian the Great. Ruler of the Eastern Roman Empire in the 6th century, Justinian wasn't content with merely preserving Rome's legacy. He wanted to outshine it. He built cathedrals, courts, walls, and aqueducts, a stone and mortar declaration that Constantinople was the new Rome. And beneath the city's foundation, he built a marvel no one would see, the Basilica Cistern. Construction began around 532 CE, shortly after the Nika riots burned half the city to the ground. In the smouldering aftermath, Justinian commissioned a new underground water reservoir that would not only supply his rebuilt imperial palace, but also withstand siege and fire. It was both a precaution and a political statement. Constantinople would never thirst, and the emperor would never falter. The cistern was built on the site of a former basilica, hence the name, and would require enormous resources. Thousands of labourers, including prisoners of war, carved out a space nearly the size of a cathedral beneath the city. The result was an underground reservoir measuring 138 by 64 metres, supported by 336 columns, many of them reused, or spolia, taken from older Roman and Greek temples. Reusing columns wasn't just economical, it was symbolic. Justinian was literally building a new empire on the ruins of the old. Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian capitals sit side by side, reminders that Rome's grandeur had been inherited, reshaped, and submerged beneath Constantinople. The engineering was astonishing. Vaulted ceilings distributed weight evenly. Brick walls were waterproofed with thick layers of mortar. Arched supports prevented collapse. And most importantly, the cistern was fed by the Varlans and Hadrian aqueducts, some stretching over 19 kilometers from the Belgrade forest. This ensured the cistern could store vast reserves, ready for drought, fire, or siege. But the true brilliance of the cistern is its invisibility. It did not boast. It hid. The public never saw it. There were no triumphal arches or gilded mosaics. Just quiet, dark utility, a subterranean heartbeat beneath the city's grandeur. And yet, for all its silence, it was a lifeline. An emperor's answer to chaos and collapse. It whispered one message through every brick, that Rome still lived, just deeper underground. Step inside the Basilica Cistern and you don't feel like you've entered a reservoir. You feel like you've stumbled into a forgotten temple. A forest of stone rises around you. 336 marble columns arranged in perfect rows, their reflections shimmering across black water. The silence is only broken by the occasional drip from the ceiling, echoing like the breath of the past. These columns aren't uniform. That's part of what makes them so haunting. Some are smooth, others fluted. Their capitals range from Ionic scrolls to Corinthian leaves, and a few seem entirely improvised. That's because many of these columns were spolia, architectural or sculptural pieces recycled from earlier Roman and Greek ruins. It's a mosaic of empires within one structure, as if the gods of old temples had been exiled to this damp underworld. Most columns stand around 9 meters tall, supporting brick arches that make the entire chamber feel like a submerged cathedral. The marble, soaked in centuries of moisture, glows faintly under the cistern's dim lighting, yellow, grey, and pink tones flickering across the stone like candlelight trapped in water. Among these pillars, two stand out for their eerie artistry: the Tyr column and the Medusa columns. The Tyr column, also called the Weeping column, is covered in swirling engravings resembling peacock eyes or teardrops. Some believe it was carved to honor the slaves who died during the cistern's construction. Legend says that if the column drips on you, it brings good luck, a somber myth for a place already heavy with memory. The placement of the columns, 12 rows of 28, wasn't random. Their arrangement created symmetry and balance, a Byzantine obsession rooted in both Roman engineering and Christian cosmology. Even in a structure few were meant to see, aesthetic order mattered. The Byzantines understood that beauty and function were never separate. Over the centuries, algae and mineral buildup have softened the lines of the columns. Roots once crept through cracks in the ceiling. Bats nested in the arches. Time, like water, wore everything smooth. Today, walking between these columns feels like drifting through a dream, as if the world above has forgotten something sacred that continues to wait in the dark. In the far northwest corner of the basilica cistern, tucked beneath two marble columns, lie the most enigmatic relics of the entire structure, two massive stone Medusa heads. One is laid sideways, the other rests upside down. No inscriptions, no explanations. Just two ancient faces staring out from under the water, as if waiting for someone to ask the right question. Where did they come from? No one knows for certain. Scholars believe the heads were likely taken from a Roman temple or public building, and reused here as column bases during construction in the 6th century. They are masterpieces of Roman stonework, detailed, expressive, and disturbingly lifelike. And yet, here they sit, submerged in silence, repurposed into structural filler. It's as if the serpent-haired Gorgon had been exiled into the damp to hold up the weight of the empire she once defied. The fact that one head is sideways and the other upside down has puzzled historians for centuries. Some say it was purely practical, a way to make the blocks fit beneath the columns. But the Byzantines were too careful, too symbolic, for that to be the only reason. More compelling theories suggest the positioning was intentional, to neutralize Medusa's power, a way of defanging the myth, rendering her petrifying gaze harmless underground. Others whisper of deeper symbolism. Medusa was, after all, a symbol of rebellion, of the monstrous feminine, of power feared and punished. To place her beneath the feet of the empire, literally, may have been a quiet political message, a sculptural act of domination. Or perhaps the opposite, a secret rebellion carved into stone, hidden away in the underworld of Constantinople. In Greek mythology, Medusa's head was used by Perseus as a weapon, even after her death. Her image became apotropaic, meant to ward off evil. She appeared on shields, coins, and doorways. Could her presence here have been protective? Was she placed in the cistern not to punish, but to safeguard the sacred water below the city? Visitors today still pause in front of the Medusas, hushed. The air seems heavier near them. Whether you believe in myths or not, their presence is undeniable. You don't just look at Medusa in the basilica cistern. You feel her watching you back. In ancient Constantinople, water meant survival. The city was famed for its towering walls, its gold-covered churches, its imperial courts, but without water, it was nothing more than a gilded coffin. The basilica cistern wasn't just a marvel of architecture, it was a military asset. Hidden beneath the city's foundations, it served as a silent lifeline during times of siege, drought, and disaster. The Byzantine capital was under constant threat. Surrounded by enemies for centuries, Persians, Arabs, Bulgars, Crusaders, the city endured countless sieges. One of the most devastating was the Arab siege of 718 CE, where food and water supplies were stretched thin for over a year. While aqueducts could be cut or poisoned, the cisterns, sealed underground and stocked in advance, ensured that Constantinople did not fall. The basilica cistern, with its massive capacity, helped sustain the palace and nearby districts through these long, desperate days. Its water was channeled in from the Belgrade forest, located over 19 kilometers away. A system of elevated aqueducts, most notably the Valens aqueduct, delivered water to the city, which was then stored in open-air cisterns and covered structures like this one. The basilica cistern stood out because it was both covered and underground, protected from heat, sunlight, and contamination. In an era when cities could die of thirst, that was revolutionary. But water was more than just tactical. It was symbolic. In Byzantine theology and imperial iconography, water represented life, rebirth, and divine favor. To control it, especially during a siege, was to show that God still smiled upon the city. This is why so many of Constantinople's cisterns were not only functional, but beautifully constructed. The basilica, with its forest of columns and eerie grandeur, was a quiet cathedral to resilience. Even during the Ottoman conquest in 1453, while the city above was burning and falling, the waters of the cistern below remained calm. After the conquest, it was largely forgotten, sealed off and unused. But during those final Byzantine years, it had served its purpose. Today, as tourists wander between its columns, few realize they are walking atop one of the most crucial defenses of an empire. Not a sword or a wall, but something far more precious: silence, water, and time. For nearly a century after the Ottoman conquest of Constantinople in 1453, the basilica cistern lay in silence. The Ottomans, brilliant engineers in their own right, built new aqueducts and fountains that served the growing city above. The ancient Byzantine waterworks, tucked underground, unmarked and dim, faded from collective memory. No one advertised the cistern, no plaques, no maps, no fanfare. Just still water beneath the stones. And yet, the cistern refused to be forgotten. Locals in the neighborhood around Hagia Sophia began to report strange things. Some said their basements were damp year-round, no matter the season. Others claimed they could drop buckets through holes in their floors and pull up cold, fresh water. A few even claimed they were catching fish underground. A bizarre, quiet miracle, happening right below the bustling Ottoman streets. It wasn't until the 1540s that the cistern was formally rediscovered by the curious eyes of Petrus Gillius, a French scholar and traveller. Sent to Constantinople by King Francis I to study ancient texts and monuments, Gillius had a habit of asking too many questions. When he heard about the locals pulling up water and fish from the floors of their homes, he began investigating. Eventually, he found an entrance, likely through a private home, and descended into the murky depths. What he discovered astounded him: a subterranean space larger than many cathedrals in Europe, filled with columns, dark water, and dripping echoes. He rode through the cistern by candlelight, sketching and measuring its dimensions, noting the carved capitals and mysterious Medusa heads. Gillius's writings introduced the basilica cistern to the wider world, a lost wonder of the Byzantines, preserved beneath the Ottoman capital. Yet even after his discovery, the cistern wasn't restored or opened to the public. It remained mostly hidden, used occasionally as a water source, but left in semi-obscurity. The Ottoman Empire had its own monumental projects to focus on. This one was a relic. Beautiful, yes, but buried in the past. It would take centuries more before the cistern was drained, cleaned, and opened as a historical monument. But thanks to a curious French scholar and a few rumour-spreading locals, the silent cistern stirred once more, no longer forgotten, but waiting to rise from the depths. Today, when visitors descend the dim stairway near Istanbul's Hagia Sophia and step into the basilica cistern, they don't just encounter a historical ruin, they enter a living monument. It's a space where architecture, atmosphere, and memory blur together. Lit by amber lights and filled with the soft sound of dripping water, the cistern feels more like a sacred ritual than a tourist stop. It wasn't always this way. When Turkish authorities decided to restore and reopen the basilica cistern in the late 20th century, they found a flooded ruin filled with centuries of mud, algae, and decay. The columns were stained, the floor invisible beneath water and sediment, but the bones were still solid. The structure had survived earthquakes, fires, wars, and abandonment, all while holding its ceiling high. After extensive cleaning and restoration, Walkways were installed just above the water level. Lighting was carefully chosen to highlight the graceful curves of the columns and reflect them in the dark water below. The result? An atmosphere that feels more like an underground cathedral than a reservoir. It's no coincidence that some call it the sunken palace. And in the silence you hear it, the echo. Every footstep, every whisper, every drop of water reverberates through the stone like a chant from another world. It's haunting, beautiful, timeless. It's no wonder that filmmakers and artists have flocked to the space. The Basilica Cistern has appeared in films like From Russia with Love and Inferno, and in countless documentaries and music videos. It's not just a historical site, it's a stage. Visitors are often caught off guard by how emotional the space feels. Children lower their voices. Tourists slow their pace. Even the most distracted traveller stops to stare at the Medusa heads, half submerged and brooding in the shadows. There's something magnetic about this place. It doesn't ask for reverence. It quietly demands it. In recent years, the cistern has also hosted art installations, concerts and exhibitions. Modern light shows play with the reflections on the water, turning the chamber into a pool of colour and sound. It is, paradoxically, more alive now than ever. A space once hidden, now illuminated with new meaning. From imperial utility to artistic sanctuary, the Basilica Cistern has risen again, not with fire or conquest, but with silence, water, and light. In a city that has seen empires rise and fall, water has remained Istanbul's oldest and quietest witness. The Basilica Cistern, more than just a storage vault, holds centuries of symbolism, not only as a resource but as a spiritual and philosophical presence. The Byzantines, and later the Ottomans, understood that water was never just about hydration. It was about purification, power, and the thin veil between worlds. Water in the cistern moves slowly. It does not rush, and it does not speak. It ripples and reflects. Light dances across its surface, breaking the symmetry of the columns. In this, there's a kind of sacred theatre. The stillness forces you to look inward. Like a mirror, the cistern reflects not just light, but history, identity, and myth. In Byzantine theology, water played a central role in rebirth. Baptism, the most essential Christian ritual, was a watery transition from death to life, sin to purity. While the Basilica Cistern wasn't used for religious ceremony, its aura evokes that same liminal space. You descend into the earth and encounter darkness, then light, then silence. It feels like passing through a ritual, unspoken, but undeniably sacred. Some scholars argue that the location of the cistern, near the Hagia Sophia and the Great Palace, was no accident. It served not only as infrastructure, but as symbolic assurance. The emperor's court was not built on dry foundations, but on flowing, living water. Beneath every throne, a river. Beneath every law, reflection. The Ottomans, too, revered water. Their gardens, palaces, and mosques were designed around fountains and pools. Water represented divine mercy in Islam, rahmah, and architectural water features reminded the faithful of paradise. The Basilica Cistern may have been a Byzantine creation, but it fit quietly into Ottoman cosmology, cool, hidden, and eternally flowing. And then there's the psychological symbolism. Walking through the cistern evokes more than awe. It whispers memory, the way light filters through columns, the hush of footsteps echoing across water, the slow drip from a ceiling that seems to breathe. It is a space that doesn't rush to reveal itself. It waits, like water, like history. Today, the Basilica Cistern is no longer hidden. It stands proudly among Istanbul's top destinations, a haunting yet majestic reminder that the city's true heart beats not just in its minarets and mosques, but deep beneath the ground. Millions descend its steps every year, not just to learn about ancient hydraulics, but to feel the weight of time pressing gently from the walls. In a city bursting with noise and movement, the cistern is one of the few places where silence dominates. tourists instinctively whisper. Even the click of a camera shutter seems too loud. And yet, there's life here. Not just in the steady flow of visitors, but in the subtle shifts of light, the quiet splashes, and the performances that occasionally bring this space roaring back to life. Over the last 2 decades, the Cistern has hosted art exhibits, laser shows, classical music concerts, and sound installations that merge past and present. Artists and architects treat it as a canvas, a sacred space where history is not locked in glass but is part of the atmosphere. You don't observe the Basilica Cistern from a distance. You walk through it. You breathe it in. Restoration efforts have been delicate but vital. The columns have been cleaned, structural supports reinforced, and walkways improved to allow better access. At the same time, care has been taken not to strip away the very things that make it otherworldly. The soft lighting, the cool air, the low hum of dripping water. It remains an engineering marvel, yes, but also a reminder that infrastructure can be beautiful, even mystical. While the modern world debates utility versus aesthetics, the Byzantines created a water tank as elegant as a cathedral. That contradiction still stuns visitors today. Above ground, Istanbul pulses with new energy. Modern trams glide past ancient sites, and street vendors sell roasted chestnuts beside Roman ruins. Yet directly below it all lies the Basilica Cistern, unmoved, unbothered, eternal. It holds the stories of emperors, architects, invaders, and dreamers, all now echoes in the damp stone. In the Basilica Cistern, time doesn't feel linear. It loops like water circling in a basin. Past and present meet in silence, and for a moment, you're not just in Istanbul. You're in Byzantium, in Constantinople, in a shadow world that never really left.